I still remember the sound of that rain. It wasn't just falling, it was crying. Soft, endless drops tapping against the old church windows while they lowered my husband, Daniel, into the ground. 53 years of marriage. And suddenly I was standing there, clutching my black umbrella like it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. People came, hugged me, whispered the usual words. He's in a better place. He lived a good life. But no one saw what I saw in my mind. His smile, his rough hands that once held mine through every storm. His laugh that filled our kitchen on Sunday mornings. And now silence. That awful silence that follows death like a shadow. When I came home that night, I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat in Daniel's old chair by the fireplace. His Bible was still there on the table, open at Psalms 23. The Lord is my shepherd. He used to read that before bed every night. I could almost hear his voice whispering it. I ran my fingers over the pages, over the underlines and the tiny notes he used to scribble in the margins. Then I saw it. Something tucked between the pages right where the spine creased. A folded piece of paper yellowed with age. My heart started to pound. Daniel wasn't a man who hid things. He was open, honest, the kind who looked you in the eyes when he spoke. So what was this? I hesitated before touching it. It felt wrong, like I was intruding into something meant to stay hidden. But grief has a strange way of pushing you toward answers you don't even know you're looking for. So I pulled it out slowly, hands trembling. It was a note. A simple one. Written in Daniel's handwriting. I knew those letters, bold, careful, a bit shaky in the last few years. It said, "If you ever find this, my love, know that I never meant to keep the truth from you. But some things were too heavy to say out loud. That's all. Just that." I read it 3 times, my breath stuck somewhere between disbelief and fear. What truth? What could Daniel, my Daniel, have possibly kept from me? We had no secrets. Or at least I thought we didn't. I pressed the note to my chest, feeling the paper crinkle against my blouse. My tears started to fall again, but this time they weren't just from sadness. They were from confusion. From the sudden feeling that maybe I didn't know my husband as well as I believed. The clock struck midnight. I sat there, staring at the fire dying in the hearth, with the note on my lap and his Bible beside me. I wanted to burn it, pretend I never saw it. But my heart wouldn't let me. Instead, I whispered into the empty room. "Daniel, what did you mean?" The house didn't answer, but I swear, for just a second I felt something like a faint warmth on my shoulder, the way he used to rest his hand there when he wanted me to calm down. It made me shiver. The next morning I decided to search. I needed to know. I started in his study, the room he spent hours in, the one filled with the smell of old books and pipe smoke. His desk drawers were neatly organized, as always. Bills, letters, photographs. But one drawer was locked. I found the key under the desk mat, just where he used to keep the spare. Inside there was a small box wrapped in a piece of cloth. I unwrapped it, and inside there was another letter. Unopened. But it wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to MS. My fingers froze. Who was MS? I stared at those 2 initials for what felt like forever. My mind ran wild. Was it a friend? A stranger? A woman? And then I realized something else. The envelope was dated 1972. That was the year Daniel and I got married. I couldn't breathe. My hands started shaking again, and I sat down right there on the floor, the box open, the letter staring back at me like a ghost. All those years, 5 decades, and I never saw a single crack in our life together. He was my world, my anchor, my forever. But now it felt like the ground under me was slipping. I didn't open the letter. Not yet. I couldn't. I placed it back inside the box, covered it and whispered, "Daniel, who were you writing to?" The wind outside howled through the trees like it wanted to answer me. I swear it sounded almost like a voice, soft, distant, aching. I held the Bible again that night, reading his note one more time. I wanted to believe there was a good reason for everything. That he wasn't hiding something bad. That maybe the truth he spoke about was something painful, yes, but not cruel. Still, a part of me was afraid. Afraid that when I opened that letter, I'd see a side of the man I loved that I never knew existed. And yet I had to know. I owed it to myself and to him. I took a deep breath, looked straight at the camera and said softly, "Would you have opened it if you were me? Tell me honestly. Would you want to know the truth, even if it broke your heart?" If you're still listening, don't go anywhere. Because what I found next, it didn't just break my heart. It changed everything I believed about love, faith, and forgiveness. If you believe love can survive even the deepest secrets, hit that follow, because the truth I found in chapter 2 will make you question what you'd do in my place. The next morning, the sun peeked through the curtains like it was trying to convince me everything was fine. But I knew better. There was something about that letter, that 1972 date, that sat heavy on my chest. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's handwriting, that envelope, those two haunting initials, MS. I made my coffee, poured it into Daniel's old mug, the one that said "World's Best Grandpa," and sat by the window. For a long time I just stared outside, watching the wind dance with the trees. It was quiet. Too quiet. Finally I couldn't take it anymore. I walked to the study, opened the drawer, and took out the box again. The envelope felt cold, like it didn't belong in this world anymore. My hand shook as I slid my finger under the flap and tore it open. Inside was a single page, folded twice. When I opened it, I felt my heart drop. The letter began, "My dearest Margaret." Margaret. That was my name. But Daniel never called me dearest Margaret. He always said Maggie, or my girl. The way this letter was written, it didn't sound like him. The handwriting looked like his, but the words, they were from a different man. It said, "My dearest Margaret, I don't know if I have the right to write to you anymore. I've made a choice I can't undo, one that will hurt us both. But please understand, I didn't do it because I stopped loving you. I did it because I had no choice." My throat tightened. A choice? What choice? I kept reading, my eyes trembling over every word. "By the time you read this, you'll be with someone better. You'll have a new life. And I'll have to live with the weight of what I've done. If God ever forgives me, I hope you can too." I stopped breathing. My hand went to my mouth. Daniel and I met in 1972, the same year as this letter. He proposed to me that summer, under the oak tree behind my father's farm. We were young, broke, but in love. He told me I was his forever. So how could this letter, written to me that same year, talk about me being with someone else? Unless it wasn't meant for me. I read the name again. "My dearest Margaret." But there were dozens of Margarets in those days. Maybe it wasn't me at all. That thought hit me like ice. Had Daniel been writing to another woman? Someone who shared my name? The letter wasn't signed Daniel. It ended simply with, "Yours always, D." I sat there for a long time just staring at that single letter. D. My husband's initial. The same D that signed every birthday card, every note he ever left me. But what if it wasn't meant for me? I wanted to scream, to ask him why, to shake the truth out of him. But all I had was silence and a piece of paper that smelled faintly of dust and regret. I folded it back carefully and whispered, "Who were you, Daniel?" That night I couldn't eat, couldn't think straight. I went through every photograph, every box of memories we'd built together. And then, buried under an old photo album, I found something else, a small faded picture. It was Daniel, younger, clean-shaven, in his army uniform. And next to him, a woman, smiling, holding his arm. On the back, written in Daniel's handwriting, "Margaret, 1969. But that wasn't me. I felt my knees go weak. I dropped the photo. My breathing grew shallow. So there was another Margaret. The realization hit me like lightning. The note in the Bible, the hidden letter, the locked drawer. It all connected. My husband had loved someone else before me. Someone with my name. I sat down on the floor again, the photo trembling in my hands. All these years, 53 years, and he never said a word. I wanted to hate him for it, but the tears came before anger could. I cried until I couldn't anymore. When the tears stopped, I looked at his photo again. His face, that gentle smile, those kind eyes, and I whispered, "Why didn't you tell me?" Maybe he thought it would ruin what we had. Maybe he thought it didn't matter anymore. But it did matter, because now I couldn't look at our memories without wondering if she haunted them too. That night I couldn't stay in bed. I sat in the living room again, the Bible open on my lap. I whispered, "Daniel, was she the one you truly loved first?" And maybe I imagined it, but I felt that same warmth again, that faint, comforting touch on my shoulder, like he was trying to say, "It's not what you think." But if it wasn't what I thought, then what was it? I had to know more. So I called the one person who might still remember him from those early days, Clara, Daniel's younger sister. She lived 2 towns away. We hadn't spoken much since the funeral. When she answered, her voice cracked a little. Maggie? Are you okay? I took a deep breath. Clara. Did Daniel ever know someone named Margaret? Before me. There was a long silence. Then she said softly, Oh, Maggie. I was hoping you'd never ask that. My stomach twisted. So it's true. She hesitated. There's something you need to know. But it's not what you think. I gripped the phone tighter. Clara, please tell me everything. Her sigh trembled through the line. She wasn't just someone he knew, Maggie. She was someone he lost. And then she said something that made the blood drain from my face. She died, Maggie. Long before he met you. If someone you loved hid a painful secret from the past, would you want to uncover it? Or let it stay buried with them? Tell me what you'd do below. When Clara said those words, she died long before he met you. Something inside me cracked open. I didn't know whether to feel relief, sorrow, or betrayal. Relief because he hadn't been unfaithful. Sorrow because there had been someone else he once loved deeply. Betrayal because he never told me. I swallowed hard, my voice trembling. Clara, who was she? Her sigh came through the phone like a ghost. Her name was Margaret Sullivan. Everyone called her Maggie too. She and Daniel were engaged before he went to serve in Vietnam. She was the love of his life back then. My hand went to my chest. Maggie Sullivan. Emmett. The initials on the envelope. Clara continued, her voice shaking with old memories. She died in a car accident a week before he was supposed to come home. He never got to say goodbye. Mama said he came back a different man. Quieter. Sadder. He never talked about her again. I didn't say a word. The world around me blurred as her voice faded into the distance. 53 years of marriage, and I never once heard that name. Never once saw him falter when he looked at me. He carried that grief like a shadow I never noticed. Maggie, Clara said softly. He didn't hide it because he didn't love you. He just couldn't bear to reopen the wound. You reminded him of her in name, in spirit. But you were his healing, not his past. Her words hung in the air like smoke. After we said goodbye, I sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear even though the line had gone silent. My tears finally came, quiet and deep. I thought of Daniel as a young man, broken, grieving, holding that Bible to his chest. I could see him sitting by candlelight, writing that note to the woman who'd never read it. And somehow, after all those years, it had found its way to me. That night, I went to the attic. It had been years since I'd been up there. Daniel used to keep all his old boxes, his medals, his journals. The smell of dust and cedar hit me the moment I opened the door. The wooden floor creaked under my steps. I found a trunk marked 1970 to 1975. My fingers brushed over the lid. I lifted it slowly. Inside were yellowed photographs, his army jacket, and a small velvet box. Inside the box was an engagement ring. Simple, elegant. A gold band with a single diamond, delicate, beautiful, old-fashioned. The tag inside read, "To MS Forever Yours, D." I sank to the floor, clutching it in my hand. My tears fell onto the ring, making it shimmer in the dim attic light. I whispered, "Oh, Daniel, all this time." He must have kept it as a memory, a promise never fulfilled. Maybe he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. Maybe part of him wanted her to be remembered. And you know something, sweetheart? I didn't feel jealous. Not anymore. I felt honored. Honored that even with the cracks in his soul, he still chose to love me, build a life with me, laugh with me, grow old with me. But the story wasn't over yet. Because at the bottom of that trunk, wrapped in a cloth, was a journal. Daniel's handwriting on the cover. If I can't say it, let these pages tell her. I hesitated for a long time before opening it. My fingers trembled as I turned the first page. April 1972. It's been 3 years since Margaret died. Sometimes I still dream of her. Sometimes I wake up reaching for a hand that isn't there. But today I met someone new. Her name is Maggie too. She laughs like the world never heard her. She doesn't know how much I need that sound. My breath caught in my throat. He had written about me. I flipped through the pages, each one a window into the man I thought I fully knew. He wrote about our first date, our wedding, our home, our children, but every few pages there was a small note to the one who came before me. Margaret, I wish you could see how she smiles. You'd be happy for me. I hope heaven lets you know she saved me. I pressed my hand against the paper and whispered, "Oh, Daniel. You loved us both, didn't you?" It wasn't the kind of betrayal I feared. It was something deeper. A quiet, sacred sorrow that lived alongside love. You see, life doesn't erase pain. It just makes room for new love to grow beside it. Daniel's heart wasn't divided. It was layered, like a garden that blooms again after winter, still carrying the memory of the frost. As I read on, I found one final entry dated just a month before he passed. If she ever finds this, I hope she understands. I never compared them. I just carried them both. One taught me how to love. The other taught me how to live. And when my time comes, I'll thank God for both. I closed the journal, tears flowing freely now. For the first time since his funeral, I smiled through the pain. That night, I placed the old ring next to his Bible on the table, right where his note had been. I lit a candle beside it and whispered, "You don't have to hide anymore, Daniel. She's part of your story, and now she's part of mine too." The house felt peaceful again. The air lighter. Maybe it was the candle flicker, or maybe it was him. I looked straight at the camera, my voice barely a whisper. Do you believe love can exist in 2 lifetimes? That one heart can carry 2 souls without breaking? Because I do now. If you're still here with me, don't forget to tap that follow. The next part of my story will show you how that hidden love changed the way I saw my own life. And what I found next in that attic will leave you breathless. That night I couldn't sleep again. Not because of sadness this time, but because I felt something shifting inside me. For the first time in days, my grief didn't feel like a hole. Felt like a door. A door Daniel had left open, waiting for me to walk through. The candle had burned down to a stub, the old ring gleaming faintly beside his Bible. I traced my fingers over it again. It was strange. I didn't feel jealousy anymore. Only a deep, aching curiosity. Who was the woman who loved him before I did? What was she like? What pieces of her lived in the man I married? I went back to the attic the next morning. The air was cooler, the sunlight cutting through the dust like thin ribbons. The trunk sat where I'd left it, open like it was waiting for me. Daniel's journal was still there, but something inside me whispered that I hadn't found everything yet. So I looked deeper. Beneath the old army photos and medals, I found a faded envelope wrapped in parchment. It was brittle, sealed with wax that had half melted away. There was no name on it, just one simple word written in Daniel's handwriting. Return. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was another letter, older, rougher, the ink slightly smudged by time. It wasn't from Daniel. It was to him. The handwriting was delicate and neat, feminine. The date, May 12, 1969. And at the top, the words that froze my heart. To my dearest Daniel. I began to read. If you're reading this, it means you came back from that place. I hope you did. I pray every night for your safety. If something happens to me, please remember love doesn't end with goodbye. It waits, Daniel. It always waits. The letter went on, full of tenderness, faith, and hope. Margaret Sullivan had written it before Daniel's deployment. She told him she'd wait for him, no matter how long it took. But fate never gave her the chance. I felt tears sliding down my cheeks before I even realized I was crying. It was like reading a ghost's words. A love letter sent across time. From one woman to another through the heart of the same man. I whispered, "You did wait for him, didn't you, sweetheart? Just in a different way." As I turned the paper over, I noticed a small folded note tucked inside the same envelope. This one was written by Daniel years later, maybe after he'd found her letter again. It said, "You kept your promise, Margaret. You waited. You came back to me in her. Same name. Same soul. I think God sent her to help me finish what we never could." I gasped. He believed I was her, not in the literal sense but in spirit. He thought the love he lost had returned to him in me. It was like the world went quiet for a moment. I sat there in the attic, the sunlight warming my shoulders, that old letter trembling in my hands, and I realized something I'd never understood before. Maybe love doesn't end when a heart stops beating. Maybe it just changes its form. Finds new faces, new names, new chances to bloom. For years Daniel used to tell me, When I met you, Maggie, I felt like I'd known you forever. I always thought it was just something sweet he said. But now maybe he meant it. Maybe somewhere deep in his soul, he did know me before he knew me. I held that thought close as I came downstairs. I made myself some tea, sat in Daniel's chair, and opened his Bible again. Between the Psalms and Proverbs, I found another tiny note I hadn't noticed before, written in faint pencil, almost erased by time. It said, "Forgive me for the silence. Some love stories never end, they just begin again." I stared at those words for a long time. My chest ached, but not from pain anymore, from something deeper. Understanding. For years, I thought our story began the day he proposed to me under that oak tree. But maybe it had started long before. In another lifetime, another name, another promise. I whispered, "You loved her, and through her you found me. And now through you, I'll carry both of us." That night, I placed both letters, hers and his, side by side on the table, next to his Bible. I lit 2 candles this time. One for him and one for her. The flames flickered softly, dancing together in the stillness of the room. And I could almost see them, 2 souls intertwined at peace. You know, sweetheart, when you love someone that deeply, you stop seeing it as a competition between the past and the present. Love just becomes this endless circle. No beginning, no end, just connection. I looked straight at the camera, my voice trembling but warm. Have you ever felt like you've met someone before? Like your heart recognized them before your mind did? Because that's what Daniel felt when he met me. And now I think maybe I felt it too. That night, as I drifted to sleep, I dreamed of Daniel, younger, smiling, standing beneath that same oak tree. But this time he wasn't alone. A woman stood beside him. Another me, but not me. The first Margaret. They both looked at me and Daniel smiled. "Now you understand, my love," he said softly. "You were never second. You were the continuation." When I woke up, tears stained my pillow, but my heart felt light for the first time since he passed. Because I realized something. Love doesn't belong to one lifetime. It belongs to eternity. And maybe, just maybe, the woman Daniel once lost and the woman he grew old with were never 2 people at all. Just one love living twice. If you believe that some souls are meant to find each other again, no matter the time, the pain, or the name, let me know in the comments. I want to hear your stories too. I woke up before the sunrise the next morning. The kind of quiet morning that almost feels like the world's holding its breath. For the first time since Daniel's passing, my heart didn't feel heavy. Felt curious. Alive in a strange, peaceful way. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat down by the window, and looked at the 2 candles I'd left burning low through the night. Only soft pools of wax remained, one slightly larger than the other. Somehow that felt fitting. Maybe one love burned longer, but both had shared the same flame. But something was still pulling at me. A whisper in my chest I couldn't ignore. A feeling that Daniel's story wasn't finished yet. I went back to the attic after breakfast, determined to look through every single thing he'd ever tucked away. It wasn't just about curiosity anymore. It was about understanding the man I loved completely. Every hidden layer, every memory that shaped him. I went through boxes of letters, old photographs, medals, and newspaper clippings. And then I found a small, weathered tin box at the very bottom of the trunk, one I hadn't seen before. There was a label on it written in Daniel's handwriting. "For Maggie, when the time is right." My heart nearly stopped. Inside the box were 3 things. A folded piece of paper, a locket, and an old photograph. The photograph was of a little girl, maybe 4 or 5 years old, sitting in a garden full of sunflowers. She had soft brown curls and the brightest smile. On the back, written faintly, "Margaret's niece, 1970. I frowned. Her niece? I never knew the first Margaret had family nearby. I flipped open the locket next. Inside was a tiny picture of Daniel in his army uniform on one side, and the same little girl on the other. And inside the folded note, written in Daniel's shaky handwriting, were the words that made me go still. "She grew up, Maggie. You met her once, though neither of you knew it. She's part of her. And part of you." I read that line again and again, whispering it under my breath. She's part of her. And part of you. First I didn't understand. But then a cold shiver ran through me. The little girl, her eyes, that smile, they looked so familiar. I went downstairs, opened my family album, and flipped through pages of pictures, birthdays, holidays, generations. And there she was, my own mother as a child. The same curls, the same garden, the same dimple when she smiled. I dropped the album onto the table, my hands trembling. Could it be? Could Daniel's first love's niece have been my mother? I turned back to the note. Daniel's words suddenly made sense. She's part of her. And part of you. He must have realized it later in life. That the woman he lost, and the woman he married, were connected through blood. I sat there for a long time, staring at the faces in those faded photographs. My mother passed away when I was just 21. She never spoke about her childhood much, said it was painful to remember. She'd grown up in a small coastal town, the same town Daniel lived in before the war. My God, it was all connected. That's why Daniel had looked at me the way he did when we first met, that quiet, searching gaze. Maybe somewhere in his heart, he recognized the eyes of a little girl he once promised to protect. I could almost hear his voice again. You felt like someone I'd known my whole life, Maggie. It wasn't just love at first sight. It was recognition, a piece of his past finding its way home. I don't know how long I sat there crying, not from sadness this time but from awe. Life had circled back in the most extraordinary way. Daniel hadn't just fallen in love with me. He'd been led to me through time, through grief, through family. And maybe that's what he meant by return. Maybe I was never just the second chapter. Maybe I was the closing line of a love story that began long before I was even born. Later that evening I called Clara again. My voice shook when I asked, Clara, did Daniel ever mention Margaret's family? A niece. There was a long silence. Then Clara sighed softly. He did once. Her name was Rose, I think. Sweet little thing. Her sister, Margaret's older one, moved away after the accident. Why do you ask? I took a deep breath. Because my mother's name was Rose. The silence on the other end lasted nearly a minute. Then Clara whispered, Oh, Maggie, that means. I know, I said, my voice trembling. It means I'm her niece. The niece he promised to protect. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I realized what that meant. Daniel had lost one Margaret, and without knowing it, spent the rest of his life loving another. Her family. Her blood. Me. I looked at the camera again, eyes glistening, voice breaking. Can you imagine that, sweetheart? That the person you were meant to love might have been written into your story generations before you were even born. The Bible sat open beside me, the pages fluttering as a breeze slipped through the window. I smiled through the tears and whispered, You found your way back, didn't you, Daniel? Just like you promised. That night, I placed the locket beside the candles, one for him, one for her, and added a third one, small and delicate. For me. For the girl who carried both their stories without even knowing it. As the flames flickered together, I felt peace settle into the room like a soft blanket. Love hadn't just connected two hearts. It had connected generations. And in that quiet glow, I finally understood what Daniel had always tried to tell me without words. That some promises don't end with goodbye. They wait, they wander, and they find their way home, even if it takes a lifetime. Do you believe people are brought into our lives for reasons written long before we're born? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your story too. I woke up before the sunrise the next morning. The kind of quiet morning that almost feels like the world's holding its breath. For the first time since Daniel's passing, my heart didn't feel heavy. Felt curious. Alive in a strange, peaceful way. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat down by the window, and looked at the two candles I'd left burning low through the night. Only soft pools of wax remained, one slightly larger than the other. Somehow that felt fitting. Maybe one love burned longer, but both had shared the same flame. But something was still pulling at me. A whisper in my chest I couldn't ignore. A feeling that Daniel's story wasn't finished yet. I went back to the attic after breakfast, determined to look through every single thing he'd ever tucked away. It wasn't just about curiosity anymore. It was about understanding the man I loved completely. Every hidden layer, every memory that shaped him. I went through boxes of letters, old photographs, medals, and newspaper clippings. And then I found a small, weathered tin box at the very bottom of the trunk, one I hadn't seen before. There was a label on it written in Daniel's handwriting. For Maggie, when the time is right. My heart nearly stopped. Inside the box were three things. A folded piece of paper, a locket, and an old photograph. The photograph was of a little girl, maybe 4 or 5 years old, sitting in a garden full of sunflowers. She had soft brown curls and the brightest smile. On the back, written faintly, Margaret's niece, 1970. I frowned. Her niece? I never knew the first Margaret had family nearby. I flipped open the locket next. Inside was a tiny picture of Daniel in his army uniform on one side, and the same little girl on the other. And inside the folded note, written in Daniel's shaky handwriting, were the words that made me go still. She grew up, Maggie. You met her once, though neither of you knew it. She's part of her. And part of you. I read that line again and again, whispering it under my breath. She's part of her. And part of you. First I didn't understand. But then a cold shiver ran through me. The little girl, her eyes, that smile, they looked so familiar. I went downstairs, opened my family album, and flipped through pages of pictures, birthdays, holidays, generations. And there she was, my own mother as a child. The same curls. The same garden. The same dimple when she smiled. I dropped the album onto the table, my hands trembling. Could it be? Could Daniel's first love's niece have been my mother? I turned back to the note. Daniel's words suddenly made sense. She's part of her. And part of you. He must have realized it later in life. That the woman he lost, and the woman he married, were connected through blood. I sat there for a long time, staring at the faces in those faded photographs. My mother passed away when I was just 21. She never spoke about her childhood much, said it was painful to remember. She'd grown up in a small coastal town, the same town Daniel lived in before the war. My God, it was all connected. That's why Daniel had looked at me the way he did when we first met, that quiet, searching gaze. Maybe somewhere in his heart, he recognized the eyes of a little girl he once promised to protect. I could almost hear his voice again. You felt like someone I'd known my whole life, Maggie. It wasn't just love at first sight. It was recognition, a piece of his past finding its way home. I don't know how long I sat there crying, not from sadness this time but from awe. Life had circled back in the most extraordinary way. Daniel hadn't just fallen in love with me. He'd been led to me through time, through grief, through family. And maybe that's what he meant by return. Maybe I was never just the second chapter. Maybe I was the closing line of a love story that began long before I was even born. Later that evening I called Clara again. My voice shook when I asked, Clara, did Daniel ever mention Margaret's family? A niece. There was a long silence. Then Clara sighed softly. He did once. Her name was Rose, I think. Sweet little thing. Her sister, Margaret's older one, moved away after the accident. Why do you ask? I took a deep breath. Because my mother's name was Rose. The silence on the other end lasted nearly a minute. Then Clara whispered, Oh, Maggie, that means. I know, I said, my voice trembling. It means I'm her niece. The niece he promised to protect. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I realized what that meant. Daniel had lost one Margaret, and without knowing it, spent the rest of his life loving another. Her family. Her blood. Me. I looked at the camera again, eyes glistening, voice breaking. Can you imagine that, sweetheart? That the person you were meant to love might have been written into your story generations before you were even born. The Bible sat open beside me, the pages fluttering as a breeze slipped through the window. I smiled through the tears and whispered, You found your way back, didn't you, Daniel? Just like you promised. That night, I placed the locket beside the candles, one for him, one for her, and added a third one, small and delicate. For me. For the girl who carried both their stories without even knowing it. As the flames flickered together, I felt peace settle into the room like a soft blanket. Love hadn't just connected two hearts. It had connected generations. And in that quiet glow, I finally understood what Daniel had always tried to tell me without words. That some promises don't end with goodbye. They wait, they wander, and they find their way home, even if it takes a lifetime. Do you believe people are brought into our lives for reasons written long before we're born? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your story too. That night I barely slept. My mind kept replaying Daniel's words. She's part of her and part of you. It felt like I was standing between two mirrors, each reflecting generations of love and loss back at me. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Daniel had been trying to tell me this for years. In his quiet smiles, in his tender way of looking at me whenever I hummed that old tune he said sounded familiar. Now I understood why. It was the same song Margaret used to sing. My mother must have learned it as a child, then passed it to me without knowing its origin. And when Daniel heard me hum it decades later, his heart recognized something mine hadn't yet remembered. That realization alone made my chest ache, like my heart was stretching, making room for something divine. I decided I needed to read the Bible again, every page this time carefully. I felt sure there was more Daniel wanted me to see. The next morning the world outside was wrapped in fog, soft and quiet, the kind of day that makes you whisper instead of speak. I made myself some tea and sat by the same window where Daniel used to read. His chair was still there, untouched since the funeral. I pulled it closer and opened the Bible gently, tracing the worn leather with my fingers. As I turned each page I noticed faint pencil marks, tiny circles and underlines that Daniel must have made years ago. He'd never been one for writing in books, so every mark felt intentional. I followed the markings one by one, jotting them down on a notepad. Each verse seemed to speak to me directly. There is a time for everything. A time to weep and a time to laugh. Love never fails. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. I whispered the verses aloud, my voice trembling, tears spilling quietly. Then I reached the book of Ruth, his favorite. A small envelope was tucked right inside the final chapter, pressed flat between the pages like it had been there for decades. For a long moment I just stared at it. My hand shook as I pulled it out. On the front, written in Daniel's shaky handwriting, "For the day you understand." My heart nearly stopped. I opened it slowly. Inside was a folded letter and a small pressed flower, a white daisy, fragile and almost translucent. I held my breath and began to read. "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, then you've already found what I never had the courage to say. I always believed God writes stories in circles, not lines. We begin where another ends. I spent years wondering why my heart never stopped searching. Until the day I met you. You carried her smile, her laughter, her warmth. But more than that, you carried peace. The kind I thought I'd never feel again. I tried to tell you many times that you were my home. Not because you reminded me of the past, but because you healed it. When I realized who you truly were, I didn't know whether to cry or thank heaven. I chose both. You see, I didn't fall in love with you because of who you reminded me of. I loved you because you showed me what love was meant to be. Forgiveness, grace, and the courage to begin again. If my life was a book, then you, my darling, were its final and most beautiful chapter. Do one thing for me, Maggie. When you light those candles again, don't just think of loss. Think of the love that survived it. Think of how far it traveled to find its way back to you. I'll be waiting, not in the past, but in every sunrise you watch from our window. Always your Daniel." By the time I reached the end, my tears had soaked the paper. I pressed it to my heart and whispered his name. The daisy slipped from my fingers and landed on the table beside the candles. It looked so delicate, like it could crumble at the slightest touch. Yet somehow it had survived all those years hidden in the Bible. Just like our love. I sat there for hours just thinking about all the ways life brings people together, even across generations. How one man's grief became another woman's destiny. And as the fog outside began to lift, the sunlight fell through the window in the exact spot where Daniel used to sit. The light touched the pages of his Bible, the letter, and the daisy, making them glow like gold. I looked into the camera then, voice low but clear. "You know, sweetheart, I used to think love ends when life does. But I was wrong. Real love, it lingers. It waits. It finds new ways to speak to us, even through pages and memories." I smiled faintly, tears still glistening on my cheeks. "Tell me honestly, if you found a letter like this from someone you lost, would you have the courage to read it? Or would you be too afraid of what it might say? Comment below, I truly want to know. Sometimes it's our fears that keep us from finding the peace waiting right in front of us." That night, I placed Daniel's letter inside a small wooden box along with the daisy and the locket. Then I whispered softly, "Thank you, my love, for never letting me forget what forever really means." As I blew out the candles, the smoke rose into the air, curling gently toward the ceiling, like it was carrying a message upward. And for the first time since he left, I didn't feel alone. I felt watched over, guided, loved. Because sometimes the people we think are gone are simply waiting for us to understand their story.